This year we walk ain't all straight. Some turns is the way you find yourself. Where is Africa in the religious landscape of Buddhism? These are the challenges and opportunities in introducing Buddhism to African American minority communities. This capstone project presentation is brought to you by myself, Shaviance Dor, Masters of Divinity in Buddhism, December 2024. So, the exploration of Africa's role in the story of Buddhism along with the challenges of introducing Buddhism to African American and minority communities, is critical and timely. This exploration gains depth and riches, which is in incorporating a unique perspective of both the Gullah Geechee tradition and the Yoruba tradition, spiritual heritage in a world marked by increasing cultural and religious diversity, and understanding how these African traditions can resonate and adapt within a cultural context is essential, particularly for communities rooted in African American history, by highlighting the Gullah Geechee narrative alongside the Yoruba influences. This thesis reveals a profound connection between the African tradition and Buddhist principles, with an attempt of enriching the overall understanding of Buddhism's role in these communities. This capstone explores the intersection of African spirituality and Buddhism with the purpose of contextualizing Buddhism within African American and minority communities, with the goal to address the lack of representation and accessibility in these communities, with particular focus on communities within the South, often found in the Bible Belt, with specific focus on Beaufort, South Carolina, and Savannah, Georgia, with the deep dive look into the African village located within Beaufort, South Carolina. This research is vital for several reasons. First, it challenges the conventional narratives that often confine Buddhism within Asian cultures and geographical boundaries. By uncovering the historical connection and examining modern interactions, particularly through the lens of Gullah Geechee storytelling in the Yoruba tradition, which we will see in the African village. The thesis broadens the scope of Buddhist studies. It represents Buddhism as dynamic and inclusive tradition that transcends cultural, racial, and ethnic boundaries, allowing the voices and expressions of both the Gullah Geechee and Yoruba people to inform and expand the conversation around Buddhist practice in America. As being a descendant of the Yoruba, and having grown up in Beaufort, South Carolina, this has taken on more of a spiritual journey, and reflection of where is Africa then turns into a sense, where am I in the religious landscape of Buddhism, and how I introduce my personal practice and beliefs to family and friends within these communities, and understanding what worked and what didn't work. How do I present this in a way that is understandable? And secondly, the thesis emphasizes the specific challenges in which I'm mentioning, and the barriers that African American and minority communities face when engaging with Buddhism. So the challenges are often intertwined with complex history of cultural and spiritual resilience, deep reflected in the Gullah Geechee narrative that conveys the strength and identity in the community, while the Yoruba tradition enriches the discussion with rich spiritual framework and practices. How do we bring it all together? How do we honor the ancestors of these traditions while then practicing Buddhism? And that question then morphs into, how do we be Buddhist and us? What does it mean to be Buddhist and you? So, for many of these communities, a unique experience, such as the legacy of slavery, systematic racism, and cultural marginalization, shaped their spiritual identities and influenced their openness to new religious expressions. And then by the integration of Gullah Geechee and Yoruba narratives, the research aims to illuminate the path to making Buddhism more accessible and relevant to those who may find the teaching transformative but feel alienated by its predominantly racist or white American representation. So, how do we put that in a space that is both safe, inclusive, and welcoming? The why and what of this thesis is investigating historical, cultural, and philosophical connections while exploring ways of contextualizing Buddhist practice. The why is promoting inclusivity and spiritual traditions and create relatable frameworks for African American practitioners. So representation does matter. Um, how does people engage with those who have identified themselves as being Buddhist within these communities? So, the reason for this format allows for the in depth exploration of historical analysis, cultural critique, and comparative philosophy while supporting a comprehensive framework for addressing the research question: where is Africa in the religious landscape of Buddhism? This topic holds practical implications for religious communities and leaders seeking to expand their reach and deepen their engagement with the diverse population. I am taking the experiencing and the journeys that I experienced with Lotus Templar nonprofit organization that I founded within Savannah, Georgia, as a case study, which serves as the example of how Buddhist communities can be creative and effective in addressing these challenges by fostering inclusivity and representation and cultural sensitivity. This effort is further enriched by honoring the storytelling traditions of the Gullah Geechee Yoruba, which has historically shaped African American spiritual narratives. So throughout my thesis, I brought in African proverbs, as you've seen in the beginning, and they will play out throughout my thesis to bring in some familiarity of within the conversation and to make it more engaging. By addressing these gaps in scholarships and practice, the thesis contributes to the broader goal of religious inclusivity and the cultural competency, and it invites a re-imaging of Buddhism that enriches the diverse perspective, particularly those rooted in the Gullah Geechee and the Yoruba tradition, making it more responsive to spiritual and social needs of African American communities in the United States. So the focus areas parallels between the African spirituality and Buddhist ethics and the shared values, interconnectedness. Now, the African proverb, I am because we are, versus the Buddhist interdependence, community, and compassion. Philosophical um, alignment, the Yoruba tenets of harmony and balance resonates with the Buddhist mindfulness and ethical living. So it is about looking for those little breadcrumbs of interconnectedness, of shared beliefs, into finding where does Africa belong within this landscape, and the cultural accessibility aims to bridge the gaps to make Buddhism more relatable to the African American communities, and sometimes that is through representation. by fostering the inclusivity and accessibility in spiritual practices. How does that look like? What does it mean to honor the ancestors while meditating? What does it mean to be mindful and you while meditating? And it encourages these dialogues between the traditions and mutual enrichment. So it's not about completely taking over and re-imaging Buddhism, but welcoming a dialogue that can honor other traditions, that can be inclusive, that can help add to the narrative. So the significance of the capstone, it does promote the nuance of understanding of Buddhism while offering a framework of spiritual inclusivity, highlighting the underexplored narratives in Buddhism and encouraging cultural relevant spiritual practice. As you can see on the left, it represents that diversity that we're seeing that is starting to take place within the Western landscape to include these communities. So I thank you for engaging with this exploration of Buddhism and African spirituality, and I look forward to your insights and feedback.